Hello everyone and welcome to this week's video. This week's video has been a highly requested video for me to touch on fine liners versus watercolours. Now, when you are choosing a material that works best with watercolours or an inking tool that works best with watercolours, it can be fairly difficult to understand. So hopefully this video will help you all a little bit with diving into different pens and different inking tools and how they react with water. Now, to be fair with each of these have all been inked and left for a day to dry so that every single one has had a equal turning point. So the one that we're doing here in particular is a Bic pen. Now, this is just your common biro pen. Now, not all biro pen is going to behave the same because this is going to depend on its ink consistency. So I highly recommend that whenever you do try this out, actually test it with watercolour first. This particular one is the Bic Soft Grip, and surprisingly, it does not react with watercolours. This is a fantastic, cheaper tool for you to be able to use. You're able to get lots of beautiful texture with it, and look, there is no bleeding with that ink at all, and that to me is fantastic. Of course, I left this 24 hours before I actually did some watercolour on top, so it's always best if you are doing some inking, just to test it a little bit first to see what is going to behave better for you. I know quite a few people actually prefer to ink after they've done watercolour, but this is a scenario if you were to apply watercolour after you've inked. Now, surprisingly, the texture that I got with this was absolutely beautiful. I think this one's one of my favourites out of all of these little witches that I've drawn, but you can see that the ink just did not react at all. We've got no feathering on the edges, no bleed, and I was really surprised with it. This is a really good pen, highly recommend it, and it works with watercolours, so what more can I say? A nice cheap alternative to a lot of fine liners out there. So if you want to see this later on with alcohol markers, let me know if you want an alcohol markers versus fine liners in the future. But next up we have the Sakura Pigma. Now, this is the Sakura Pigma brush pen. I actually picked this up ages ago. I have this thing of like trying fine liners before I actually try it out, and this was heavily recommended as a brush marker. As you can see, it's got a beautiful fibre tip as well as a thin tip on the end of it, and it goes for a retail of about £2 to £4 depending on where you get it from. So first we do our clear waters test, and as you can see, we have no bleeding, so this is going to be absolutely fine with watercolours. Just to be fair as well, I did quite heavily put on water for all of these. This is to see how the ink would react if you used a lot of water, because I know like me, sometimes I can be quite heavy handed with water, and some people may be as well. But as you can see, the ink did not react with that water at all. The watercolour is still a little bit wet, of course, and it works absolutely fine. So does this pen work? Absolutely. If you want to add it to your collection, you're more than welcome to. It can create some really beautiful textured thick lines, but it's not my favourite fine liner out there. A bit hit or miss with brush pens. I either really like them or I really dislike them, and I'm much more for a thinner, more controlled brush tip than I am a thicker brush tip. So next up we have the Tombow Brush Pen. Now, this is one I actually got in a art box, and this is very quickly becoming one of my favourite brush pens. It is this beautiful tip, as you can see here, which is a plastic tip, but it is just so nice to use. I've actually been using this for the second half of Witchtober. Now, because it was a water-based pigment, I was kind of concerned at first, because water-based pigments tend to react with water. But, as you can see here, no reaction. Now, this is down to the actual ink's makeup itself inside the pen. A lot of people do use the Tombow brush pen, and I was very surprised after layering my watercolour down that it was not getting a reaction, consider it being a water-based ink. We do get some water-based inks later on that do have a bit of reaction, but this one did not, and I was pleasantly surprised. We got no feathering in the line work, none of the line work bleeding, and I'm applying a lot of water on here, like a lot of water, and as you can see here, like you can see it's very glossy. And the Tombow brush pen, is it watercolor approved? absolutely. Look at that, no feathering, no ink bleed, and it works absolutely fine. For the line works on these are actually for my Patreons. I've actually put them up on the Patreon there for the Patreons to be able to download and colour in on their own. I really like some of this line work, and I was kind of sad when some of it was absolutely destroyed, considering this is not my best watercolour work. I just wanted to throw a little bit of colour on top just to show how it reacts with the ink and just to show overall what it's like. Next up we have the Boldmere pen. Now this is the one I was kind of concerned about, because this is the one that you can find at a UK shop called The Works, and this is a cheap art brand. You can get a pack of these for about £1 to £2 depending, and it's not my favourite liner that's out there. And apologies for this part, my water pot was not clean, so that purple ink that you see there is not the ink reacting. That is because I did not clean my water out, and that is my fault. But you can see here the ink is not reacting, and I thought it would have done with it being a very cheap pen, but it did not. It seems that the cheap pens are actually coming up very strong in this aspect, which is something that you would not have thought, but they have been coming up absolutely strong and doing fantastically in the grand scheme of things. There is no bleed here, and for a good cheap fine liner alternative, they really work. My only downside with these pens is that they do break fairly easily. The nibs on them are not the best. But if you want a good cheap fine liner, I can recommend them. And it's just not personally my favourite, because I can be quite heavy-handed, and unfortunately that can cause issues. Usually after slapping some quick colour on, still no issues. So is the Boldmere pen approved for watercolours? Absolutely. This is fantastic news if you want a cheap alternative for a fine liner. Next up, we have Posca pens. Posca pens is something that I've tried out a lot recently, and I've started to build up my collection, and it's possibly one of the more popular pens with artists, because you can get a really nice bold look with it. It comes in a variety of sizes. This is I believe this is the 0.5 or 0.3 nib. I can't remember off the top of my head, to be honest. And as you can see, it does not react with watercolours. Now this is a acrylic based pen. You can water down acrylics to act like watercolours, but once that ink is down, it is staying down. It's really well done, and as you can see here, as I'm applying quite a heavy lot of water, there is no reaction to that water at all, which is absolutely fantastic if you are concerned about using Posca pens with watercolours. Now my recommendation is that if you wanted to use Poscas with watercolours, if you want to build the texture on top with watercolours tend to create sort of a base on the paper so that there is nothing that ink can grip to. If you're applying ink on top, you will get this very textured feel to the ink, and it will not lie flat. So if you want a flat finish, I would recommend layering down your colour first. If you want to use Posca, if you want to use alcohol markers, lay down that base first. However, it's the opposite with coloured pencils. You want to flip that, and you want to do coloured pencils after watercolours, mainly because coloured pencils leave like an oil finish on top, depending on which ones you are using, or like a waxy finish, and then you won't be able to build on top. Next up is the common Sharpie. Sharpies are quite readily available, and I do actually see a lot of people using this as an inking tool. So, does it hold up to watercolours? And the answer is yes. You can see yet again, no feathering, no bleeding, and nothing here that is going to cause issue. This is fantastic. And downside to using Sharpies is that they can be quite a strong smelling pen because they are oil based. This creates this very strong smell, which can be an aversion to some people. And if you are going to be using something that is oil based, you want to be using it in a very well ventilated area. And this applies to oil paints as well. You want the room to be very beautifully ventilated so that there is no issues. Also, Sharpies, they are really fun to use. I have done artwork only using Sharpies in the past, but they do come in a variety of line works. But the thinnest one I found, after a bit, the lines just, it ran out very quickly, my very thin Sharpie, and I did not have it very long, and I was very, very upset because I have not been able to find another pen that thin since. As you can see, after a little bit of watercolour thrown on top, it works absolutely fine. Now next up we have the Derwent graphic pen. Now this is a pen that you can get at most art stores. It does come in a variety of colours. It's not particularly one of my favourites. This is just left over from a pack that I bought a long time ago. In fact, I think this is the only working one I have left out of the entire bunch that I had. And straight away, here we are. It is the first pen that we've had that bleeds. Now this is using clean water. I'm just going to show you so that you can double check that this is absolutely clear water, and as you can see, the ink is reacting to it. This is due to the ink's base being water based. Now you can create some beautiful effects with this, and this is the thing that you're going to have with some biro pens, because the ink has a water reactive ink with it. You will be able to create some really beautiful effects. So sometimes your fine liners, if you want to create this sort of like murky, sort of muddy effect where the ink sort of reacts with it and it can create gorgeous effects, totally do it. Like, I highly recommend it. But this can be very disappointing if you've just finished your line work and you're going to do the watercolor on top and it bleeds everywhere. So my recommendation with this ink is to do your watercolour first and then do your line work on top. And if you want to do finishing touches, maybe stick to like pencil crayons being built on top, because this will allow this to build texture on top of your watercolours. Another alternative for your line work could be, you could use pencil crayons as well, or coloured pencils, whichever you prefer. Lots of different people have different dialects for the same thing. Next up we have the Sakura Pigma brush. Now we have already tried the Pigma brush. The difference between this one and the other one is this is coloured ink. Now sometimes coloured ink reacts very differently to standard black or brown ink, and I wanted to test, even though this is the same brand, whether or not we were going to have a reaction with it. And of course the answer is no, because it is the same brand. But I thought it'd be really interesting to show you how a brand overall would not have a reaction. And this is due to the fact of the ink's base. The Sakura Pigmas actually do come in a very nice colour range, and I really like this purple. I've used it a few times in the line work, but as you can see, sometimes that ink can be a little bit patchy. I much prefer like darker ink to lighter ink, if that makes any sense, but that's just my personal preference. Some people may like the lighter inks. I don't know. Everyone has personal preferences at the end of the day. But the Sakura Pigma brush does work. As you can see, no bleeding, no feathering, perfect. Threw some quick watercolours on there to get the desired colours, and as you can see, absolutely fine. It was probably a bit silly for me to actually try this, but I wanted to see if the ink was reacting the same way as the Sakura Pigma pen, even though they're the same brand. To be honest, I just really wanted to try it on. Next up we have the Winterton ink. Now this is typically an ink that is used as for dipping, and this is quite a common ink that you can get hold of. However, it is water based, so you know what's going to happen, don't you? Say goodbye to this illustration, because oh boy, you ready? Now first off, it looks like it's fine, but then look at that bleed. Ugh. This is due to the ink's base, so it's reacting with the watercolour. Now I have used these inks based as watercolours because you can water them down and create some really nice effects. And yet again, as we had with the Derwent graphic marker, you can create gorgeous effects with it, but be warned, if you are going to do line work, you're gonna get this. Now bear in mind, the ink's been sat for 24 hours. It's been given plenty of time to dry out, and this is because I wanted to give every single ink inking pen or tool a fair chance, only because some inks take longer than others to dry, and this is what it all comes down to: experimentation. There is a lot that you can learn from experimenting with different inks, but if this helps you understand what tool would work best for you, it's probably best to do a little bit of research. As I said, I was really surprised with the big soft grip pen, because when I've tried biro pens in the past, I have had the ink react with watercolour, so I was very pleasantly surprised that that did work. And that's what it comes down to: experimentation. Now over the years I've learned a lot what works with stuff and what doesn't work with stuff. This is down to experimentation and me trying out different things. Look at all that ink move. Oh, doesn't it make your heart just cry? Imagine spending hours upon hours inking your piece and then just having it completely destroyed. I tried to salvage what I could, but unfortunately, as you can see, it bled everywhere. Sad arrangement, unfortunately, but it happens. There's not much you can do about that. So speaking of inks, the next one we're going to try is Zig Mangaka Brush. Now this is actually an old favourite of mine. I used to use this pen a lot. Now it is a water-based pigment, so you would think that it would react. However, it is smudge proof with alcohol markers. Now, the rule of thumb tends to be, if it works with alcohol markers, it will work with watercolours, because the inks sort of tend to react the same way. However, not all the time, but sometimes it tends to be the case. If it doesn't work with watercolours, it won't work with alcohol markers. Although I will say, if I do this video in the future, and please let me know if you are interested in it. I know this video is quite long, but I figured it was best to show you behind the scenes and showing like all the research that goes into seeing whether or not it's going to work with watercolours or not. If you want to see an in-depth review of these pens, same equipment, same things with alcohol markers, I can absolutely show you. If you want to see more pens tried out, let me know what inking tools you would like me to try out next. The Zig Mangaka Flexible was one of my all-time favourites, and this was before I found the Unipin brush pen, and this is because it was a really nice brush pen that had the nice flexible tip that wasn't a bristle tip, and I really enjoyed it. And as you can see, it works absolutely fine with watercolours. Now this is the Roundy acrylic ink. Now I have used this in a lot of videos, and those who are new to the channel, I love using dip pens. It's one of my favourite things to do. I don't do it too often because the inking process can take quite a while. But as you can see here, no ink smudging. It's fantastic. It works absolutely beautifully. However, if you don't let this ink settle and dry, it is going to react. There is no if, buts, coconuts. It is going to react. And this is just down to the actual base of the ink itself. And the good thing about using acrylic inks is it comes in a wide variety of colours. However, when using dip pens, it can take time to control. And some ink's gonna take longer to dry than others. As you can see, the lighter lines at the top, they're gonna dry much quicker than say the underbrim of this hat, just mainly because there's a lot more ink there. So my recommendation, as always, is leave that ink to dry, maybe put it aside to one day while you work on something else. Also, it can have this sheen to the ink as well, where you've put a lot of ink in there. So if you don't mind that, then absolutely stick with this. Beautiful wide variety of colours. You can have lots of different coloured lines. I really love this ink in purple. I have a shimmer purple as well, and I love them. They react so nicely. The next in the dip ink pens that I really like is the Noir. Now I've used this quite a few times in different videos, and I really enjoy it. But as I said before, dip pens can take a little bit of time to learn to control, and takes a bit of practice, which is why I like to stick with fine liners sometimes, because it gets the job done much quicker, and having to wait for ink to dry sometimes can just take too long. However, the nice thing about dip pens and using the ink with the dip pens is that you can get a nice variety of colours. There are more mistakes that can be made, but as you can see here, this doesn't react with watercolours, and I love this ink. Now, in particular, I really like this ink with alcohol markers. It's just a preference at the end of the day, but I really, really love this pen, and I really love this ink, so my recommendations. Next up, we have the one, the only Higgins Fountain Pen Indian ink. It is beautiful. It can be watered down and create some beautiful effects, but it is not waterproof, not at all. Unfortunately, it reacts with waters very, very, very quickly. It reacts with water very, very quickly. As you can see here, straight away when applying water, we're getting a lot of bleed, like a lot of bleed. Ink is spreading, and we are getting some beautiful blooming effects with this ink. Like, holy moly, it looks gorgeous. However, if this is something that you are not looking for, it can be very disheartening. As you can see, you can use this on top of if you wanted to, but I actually got this in a art box. This was in the smart box, where we was using Chinese painting and using Chinese painting techniques, and they recommend it to water down and create some beautiful effects with, and you can create some very beautiful effects with, but if you're looking to use it as a lining tool, unfortunately it's not going to work. As you can see, blooming lines, ink bleeding everywhere. It creates beautiful texture, but if you're after a finalized finished work, unfortunately it just isn't going to work, and that makes me very, very sad, because it's really nice and it's easily accessible, but unfortunately Indian ink is just not worth it. Now, finally, it would not be a fine liners versus watercolours if I hadn't included my favourite pen. Unipin fine liners are one of my all-time favourite fine liners. They work with alcohol markers, they work with watercolours and lots of different tools, and they are up there with my favourite fine liners. And I, as you can see by this video, I tried a lot of inking tools over the years, and this has to be one of my favourite pens. It comes in a wide variety of lines, and in particular lately I've been obsessed with the Unipin brush fine liner. However, the downside of using this is it does have a very limited set of colours. You only have black, brown and grey from what I have been able to physically find over the years of using these pens, and that can be quite limiting overall. But it works with watercolours like a charm, and it works with alcohol markers like a charm, and that is all 15 of these pens, inks versus watercolours. I know this video has been extremely long, but I thought it was best to show you in real time how these inks reacted. In the pile of no, this will never work, please do not use if you're using your ink as a base and watercolours on top, was the Winsor & Newton, Derwent Graphic and the Higgins Fountain Pen, or Indian ink in general. This is down to the pigments of the ink and how the ink has been bonded together. For everything else that we mentioned in this video, absolutely works. Like I said, with the brain, please work. With biro pens, please test them, because some of them are not going to work, but the Bic Soft Grip definitely does work. The Posca, the Sakura Pigma, the Sakura Pen, the Zig Mangaka Flexible, the Noir ink, the Tombow Brush Pen, the Unipin pen, the Sakura, the Sharpie, the Roundy ink. Like, all of these work with watercolors, and as you can see, there is a lot out there that you can use, each variety in different pricing, and it is easily accessible for a lot of people to use. So if you're ever wondering on what to use in the future, I hope this helps. I know this has been a very in-depth video and very long, but I really hope that this helps you out there. And let me know in the comment section down below if you'd like to see more in-depth videos like this. Now to show off some of your amazing work that you have tagged me in. Thank you so much for participating in my Witchtober prompt list this year. It has been absolutely phenomenal. I really want to go through and showcase some more of these, so let me know if you're interested in a video like that. But I hope you all have a wonderful week. Keep on drawing, and as always folks, stay creative.